welcome back to the deep dive. Think for a second about everything that makes you, well, you.
Mm.
It's not just your physical features, right?
Yeah.
It's your history, the skills you've picked up, the people you care about,
Yeah.
all of that, the whole landscape of who you are. It really hinges on one single, incredibly complex thing: human memory.
It really does. It's like the invisible architect of our consciousness. And yet, most of us sort of think memory works like a perfect video camera.
Right, like hitting save on a computer file or something.
Exactly. But that's just not how it works. Today, our mission is to really get past that idea. We're going to decode the actual architecture of memory.
And we're drawing from sources that dig into its mechanics, its surprising limitations, and even how fragile it can be.
Yeah, we want to break down this really intricate information processing system into clear, understandable parts, hopefully giving you some aha moments about how you can actually improve your own learning and understanding.
We're definitely going deep into the science here, remembering, forgetting. It's about understanding things like, why do you forget someone's name almost immediately?
Or maybe even more strangely, why can you sometimes vividly remember something that, it turns out, never actually happened?
Exactly. And crucially, how can we use the brain's own rules to learn things more effectively?
So we'll trace the journey information takes. We'll start with the basics, encoding, storage, retrieval.
Okay.
Then we'll follow the data through the classic three-stage model, sensory memory, short-term, long-term. We'll explore the bottlenecks, especially in short-term memory, and then the sheer vastness of long-term memory.
But the real deep dive, you're saying, is when we face the fact that memory isn't perfect playback, that it's more like reconstruction.
Precisely. That's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit controversial. And finally, we'll get down to the biology, the brain structures, the neurons, even the genetics involved in making memories stick.
All right, sounds like a plan. Let's start right at the beginning then. Trace that first piece of information and the three essential steps needed for it to become a memory at all. Okay, so thinking about memory as a system, an information processing system, it sounds like if any one part of this process breaks down, the information's just gone. Not just forgotten, but lost.
That's exactly right. It's a sequence. And the very first step, the absolute requirement, is encoding.
Encoding, okay.
This is all about converting the sensory input, what you see, hear, feel, into a format the brain can actually work with, a mental code it can file away.
So it's like translating an experience into the brain's language.
Yeah.
Like an electrochemical signature.
You got it. And this is really important. The quality of the final memory often depends heavily on how well it was encoded in the first place.
Okay. So if I just encode, say, how a word sounds, that's acoustic encoding, that's pretty shallow.
Right. Shallow encoding, weak memory trace usually. But if you encode its meaning, how it relates to things you already know, maybe how it makes you feel, that's semantic encoding. That's deep.
And deep encoding leads to stronger, more lasting memories. Makes sense.
Exactly. So once it's encoded, the system moves to step 2, storage.
Storing it, keeping it.
Right. This is the process of actually retaining that encoded information over time. But it's not like just putting a box on a shelf. Storage isn't passive.
Well,
No, the brain is, constantly working to maintain these codes, maybe strengthening them, maybe letting them fade if they aren't used, and where it gets stored and for how long. Well, that's what the three-stage model helps explain.
okay, so encoding, then storage, and then the part we usually notice, getting it back out.
Yes, step 3, retrieval. Accessing that stored information and bringing it back into your conscious awareness.
This is the frustrating bit, right? When you know something, but you just can't pull it up.
That's retrieval failure. It's probably the most common memory complaint. And the key to cracking it often involves retrieval cues.
Retrieval cues, like hints.
Sort of, yeah. Our sources really emphasize these. Their prompts could be something in the environment, could be a thought that were associated with the original learning experience. They act like keys to unlock the stored memory.
So retrieval isn't just random searching. It relies on finding the right trigger.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Think about trying to remember where you left your keys. Just thinking keys might not work. But if you mentally walk through the rooms you were in...
The room becomes the cue, the context.
Exactly. The smell, the lighting, who you were with all that contextual information gets encoded alongside the main memory. So the more cues you encoded initially.
The more pathways you have back to the memory later on.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So if you learned something while you were, say, really happy, feeling happy later might actually help you remember it.
It can, yeah. Emotion itself can be a very powerful retrieval cue. State-dependent memory, they call it sometimes.
Okay, so that trilogy, encoding, storage, retrieval, tells us how the information moves. But you mentioned the three-stage model tells us where it goes and for how long.
That's right. This model gives us a kind of map. It helps visualize how that flood of raw sensory data gets filtered down stage by stage until some of it hopefully becomes permanent knowledge.
And it involves three systems: sensory, short-term, and long-term memory.
Correct. And it really highlights just how much information we actually discard almost instantly every single second. ##A, sensory memory, the quick capture. So the very first stop, the initial gateway, is sensory memory.
Okay.
Think of this as having like an incredibly huge capacity, but almost zero duration. It holds raw sensory impressions, sights, sounds, smells, but only for the absolute briefest moment, a flicker.
Just long enough to register it's there.
Basically, yes. And the physical holding place for this fleeting snapshot is called the sensory register. It's like the brain's ultra short-term buffer catching everything pouring in from the senses before we even decide what to pay attention to.
Wow, okay. And does it work differently for different senses?
It does. For vision, we talk about iconic memory. That's the sensory store for visual information. It holds that mental image for just a fraction of a second, often less than 1 second.
A fraction of a second. Why so short?
Well, it's actually what allows us to perceive the world as continuous and smooth, rather than like a jerky slideshow of still images. That brief persistence blends one snapshot into the next.
Like waving a sparkler in the dark. You see the whole circle of light even though the sparkler is only in one place at a time.
Exactly. That's your iconic memory, holding onto the light trail from the previous position and overlapping it with the current one. It's vital for seeing motion and flow.
Okay, that's vision. What about hearing?
For hearing, we have echoic memory, the auditory equivalent. But interestingly, this sensory store holds the mental representation of a sound for a bit longer, typically a few seconds.
A few seconds. Why the difference? Why longer for sound?
Well, think about speech. Sound unfolds over time, right? It's sequential. If your echoic memory didn't hold on to that sound trace for a few seconds, by the time someone finished saying a sentence...
The beginning of the sentence would already be gone. You wouldn't be able to understand it.
Precisely. Echoic memory gives us that crucial acoustic buffer. It lets us string together the sounds, the phones, and actually parse language. You know when you ask someone, wait, what did you just say? And then like half a second later, you answer your own question before they even repeat themselves?
Huh? Yeah, all the time.
That's your echoic memory, finally finishing processing the sound trace it was holding just before it completely faded away. #B. Short-term memory, STM, working memory.
Okay, so sensory memory is this incredibly brief buffer. If we actually pay attention to something in that buffer, where does it go next?
Then it moves past the sensory register and enters short-term memory, or STM. Though nowadays, many researchers prefer the term working memory.
Working memory. Why the change?
Because it emphasizes that this stage isn't just passive storage, like a temporary holding tank. It's where we actively work with information, manipulate it, process it, connect it to other things. It's the brain's mental workbench.
Oh, okay, so it's active. But you mentioned it's a bottleneck.
Oh, absolutely. The limits here are, well, pretty severe. First, there's the time limit. Information in STM or working memory only lasts for about 30 seconds maximum, unless you actively do something to keep it there, like rehearsing it.
30 seconds. That's
Yeah.
it. So if I get a phone number and don't immediately repeat it.
Poof. It's likely gone. It decays very quickly without active maintenance.
Wow. Okay, so time is limited. What about capacity? How much can we actually hold on that workbench at once?
This is where George Miller's famous research comes in. He found that most people can typically hold only about 7 items or bits of information, plus or minus 2.
7 plus or minus 2. So somewhere between 5 and 9 things. That's tiny.
It is remarkably small. Think about trying to juggle lots of tasks or pieces of information simultaneously. It explains why we feel overwhelmed so easily. It's a fundamental cognitive constraint, probably evolved for efficiency. You have to be selective.
7 slots.
Yeah.
Okay. No wonder I can't remember a shopping list unless I write it down. So given these tight limits, how do we, cope? How do we make the most of those 7 slots?
We use a couple of key mechanisms to sort of cheat the system. The most basic one is maintenance rehearsal.
Just repeating it over and over, like that phone number.
Exactly. Saying it, thinking it again and again. It works. It keeps the information active in STM and prevents it from decaying immediately. But
it doesn't usually get it into long-term memory very well.
Generally, no. It's a temporary fix, a lifeline, but not a bridge to permanent storage.
Okay, so maintenance rehearsal is basic. Is there a better way?
Yes, much better. The second mechanism is far more powerful for learning, and it's called chunking.
Chunking, like
Ah,
breaking things down.
precisely. Chunking is the process of taking a large amount of information and grouping it into smaller, meaningful units or chunks. These chunks are then easier to recall.
So instead of trying to remember, say, 12 separate letters, FBICIACNNNTV,
Right, which is way over the limit.
you could group them into meaningful chunks. FBI, CIA, CNN, MTV. There's only 4 chunks.
Exactly. Now, each chunk takes up one of your precious 7 slots. You haven't increased the number of slots, but you've dramatically increased the amount of information held within each slot by making it meaningful.
That's clever. So it's about working smarter with the capacity you have. Like a chess master doesn't see 32 individual pieces, they see patterns, chunks of related pieces.
Perfect analogy. Or a musician reading sheet music, they see phrases and chords, not just individual notes. We're essentially increasing the bandwidth of each slot by packing more meaningful information into it. Hashtag tag 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 tag. See long-term memory, LTM, and transition.
Okay, so chunking helps us manage information in SPM. But what happens when we want something to stick around for longer than 30 seconds? How does it get into long-term memory, or LTM?
Right, LTM is the next stage. This is the memory subsystem responsible for storing information for, well, potentially a lifetime, days, weeks, years, decades. And its capacity is thought to be, for all practical purposes, virtually limitless.
Limitless. Wow. So how does information make the jump from that fragile, limited STM to this vast, durable LTM?
That crucial transition process is called consolidation. It's the set of processes that converts those unstable short-term memories into stable, enduring long-term memory traces.
And consolidation. It takes time, right? It's not
Yeah,
instant.
definitely not instant. It's a process that can take hours, days, even longer, and it happens largely unconsciously, especially during sleep. This is why cramming for an exam often fails in the long run. The information doesn't get enough time to properly consolidate.
Ah, okay. So consolidation is the bridge. But what determines which information gets consolidated? We don't remember everything that passes through STM.
Exactly, and this brings us back to the type of rehearsal we do. We talked about maintenance rehearsal, just repeating things. That's usually not enough for good consolidation.
Right.
What really drives information into LTM is elaborative rehearsal.
Elaborative. Making it elaborate.
In a sense, yes, it means actively thinking about the meaning of the new information and, crucially, forming meaningful connections and associations between that new information and knowledge you already have stored in LTM.
So it's not just repeating it, it's linking it, asking questions about it, relating it to my own life.
Yes, all of that. How does this new concept relate to what I learned last week? Can I think of an example from my own experience? Could I explain this simply to someone else? Can I visualize it? The more connections you build, the more elaborate the encoding.
The stronger the memory trace, and the more likely it is to consolidate properly.
Precisely. This is really the core idea behind effective studying and learning. Don't just passively reread, actively process and connect.
This sounds a lot like that levels of processing theory you mentioned earlier.
It is. The levels of processing theory basically formalizes this idea. It argues that how well information is remembered depends directly on how deeply it was processed during encoding.
So shallow processing, like noticing if a word is in capital letters, leads to weak memory.
Right. But deep processing, thinking about the meaning of the word, using it in a sentence, relating it to other concepts, that semantic processing leads to much stronger, more durable memories. You're essentially building a richer, more interconnected representation in your brain.
Okay, so through elaborative rehearsal and consolidation, we've successfully moved important information into the vast warehouse of long-term memory. But you said LTM isn't just a jumbled mess, right? It has structure.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
highly organized, though maybe not like the neat files on a computer. The dominant model for how LTM is structured is the semantic network model.
Semantic network, meaning a network based on meaning.
Exactly. Imagine LTM not as a list or a library catalog, but as a gigantic, complex web, or maybe like a huge interconnected city map. In this web, every concept, fact, idea, or piece of knowledge you possess is represented as a node. Think of it as a point on the map.
So apple is a node, red is a node, fruit is a node, doctor is a node.
Precisely. And these nodes are connected to each other by pathways or links. The strength and pattern of these links represent the associations and relationships between the concepts.
So the apple node would have strong links to red, fruit, round, maybe healthy tree.
Exactly. And maybe weaker links to computer or pie or teacher. The links reflect how closely related the concepts are in your own personal knowledge structure.
Okay, so it's a web of interconnected concepts. What happens when we try to retrieve something from this web?
This is where it gets really cool. The model proposes a process called spreading activation.
Spreading activation, like ripples in a pond.
That's a perfect analogy. When you think about or are presented with a particular concept, let's say fire engine, that node becomes activated.
Okay, the fire engine node lights up.
Yeah. And then that activation doesn't just stay there. It spreads outwards along the connecting pathways to related nodes, like ripples spreading across the water.
So activating fire engine would then automatically activate nearby strongly linked nodes like,
Red, truck, siren, emergency, ladder, firefighter. These concepts are primed, brought closer to consciousness just by thinking about the initial concept.
wow. So that's why hearing one word can instantly bring a whole cluster of related ideas to mind.
Exactly. It's the spreading activation moving through your personal semantic network. And this also explains why retrieval cues work so well.
How so?
Well, if you're trying to remember a specific piece of information, the target node, but can't quite access it directly, activating a related node, providing a good cue, sends those ripples of activation towards the target.
So the cue gives the activation a starting point closer to what you're looking for.
Precisely. And the more interconnected your knowledge is, the more elaborative rehearsal you did, creating more links during encoding, the more pathways that activation can spread along. It makes retrieval much more likely, much easier.
So information that was learned superficially without many connections, it's like an isolated node in the network, hard for the ripples to reach.
Exactly. It might be stored somewhere, technically, but if it has very few links to other concepts, the spreading activation from related cues might never reach it. It becomes effectively inaccessible, forgotten. It really underscores why deep connected learning is so crucial for long-term recall. So we've built this picture of LTM as this vast, organized, interconnected network capable of storing immense amounts of information for long periods. It sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really does. Almost like that perfect recording device we started out dismissing.
But here's the twist. Here's where we have to pivot. Because perhaps the most surprising and frankly practically important finding from memory research is this. LTM is incredibly fallible. It's nowhere near as reliable as we instinctively feel it is.
Fallible.
Yeah.
I mean, prone to errors, even long-term memories.
Absolutely. Prone to distortion, prone to errors, even prone to containing things that never happen at all. That video recorder analogy, we really have to throw it out the window now. Hashtag, tag, no NA2. Constructionist theory, the leading view today.
Okay, so if it's not a recording, what is it? What's the current thinking?
The leading view today is known as the constructionist theory of memory.
Constructionist?
Yeah.
Like building something.
Exactly. This theory proposes that memory isn't a replica of the past. It's not like playing back a file. Instead, accessing a memory is an act of reconstruction.
Reconstruction. So every time I remember something, I'm rebuilding it.
Pretty much, yes. When you recall an event, say your high school graduation, you're not retrieving a complete stored video. You're actually piecing it together right now.
Wow. What am I piecing together?
You're using fragments of information that were actually encoded from the event, maybe the feeling of the sun, the sound of the speaker, the sight of a friend's face. But you're also weaving in your general knowledge about graduations, your assumptions, maybe even information you learned after the event.
So my brain is kind of filling in the gaps based on what usually happens or what makes sense.
Precisely. It does this partly for efficiency. Storing every single detail perfectly would be incredibly costly in terms of brain resources. So it stores the gist, the key elements, and then uses logic, schemas, and existing knowledge to reconstruct a coherent narrative each time you access the memory.
Okay, that makes it efficient and flexible, I guess, but
Vulnerable?
highly vulnerable.
Right.
Because the reconstruction process isn't perfect. Hashtag tab be distortion and false memories.
So if remembering is rebuilding, does that mean the memory can change each time I rebuild it?
That's the critical implication. Every act of retrieval is also potentially an act of subtle editing or alteration before the memory gets stored again, reconsolidated. Our source material uses a great analogy here, the game of telephone. Where the message gets distorted as it passes along the line.
Exactly. With memory, each time you recall an event, pass the message to yourself, you might unconsciously introduce tiny changes. Maybe you emphasize a detail that wasn't prominent originally, or you smooth over an inconsistency, or you incorporate a suggestion someone else made about the event.
And over time, with repeated retrievals.
These small distortions can accumulate. The reconstructed memory can drift further and further from the original event until, potentially, it bears little resemblance to what actually happened. Or worse, you might construct a memory for something that never occurred at all.
A false memory. You can genuinely believe you remember something that didn't happen.
Yes, research has shown this definitively. It's possible to implant entirely false memories in people under certain conditions, often simply by suggesting the event occurred and encouraging them to imagine it. Because the brain reconstructs, it can incorporate that suggestion and imagination into a seemingly real, felt memory.
Wow, that's unsettling. Especially when you think about important memories, like in legal settings. ##C. The misinformation effect in eyewitness testimony.
Absolutely. And the legal system is where the fragility of memory has some of the most traumatic and concerning consequences. This brings us to the misinformation effect.
Misinformation effect. That sounds like getting wrong information.
It is. Specifically, it refers to how memory can be distorted when a person is exposed to misleading or incorrect information after an event occurs, but before they try to recall it.
So something that happens during that waiting period, the retention interval you called it.
Exactly. During that time between witnessing, say, a crime and being interviewed about it, if the witness encounters misinformation, maybe from talking to other witnesses, reading news reports, or even from the way questions are phrased by investigators, that misinformation can get woven into their reconstruction of the event.
It contaminates the memory rebuilding process.
Precisely. It becomes part of the memory, and the witness often can't distinguish the original information from the post-event suggestion.
Can you give an example?
Classic studies by Elizabeth Loftus are famous here. For instance, showing participants a video of a car accident. Later, if you ask one group, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? They give higher speed estimates.
Then a group asks how fast they were going when they hit each other.
Exactly. And even more strikingly, the smashed group is significantly more likely to later report seeing broken glass in the video, even when there was none. The word smashed acted as misinformation, subtly altering their memory reconstruction.
That's incredible, just one word.
It highlights how suggestible memory can be. And our sources list several factors that influence how accurate eyewitness testimony is likely to be. It's notoriously complex.
Like what sort of factors?
Well, counterintuitively, the witness's degree of confidence in their memory is often a poor predictor of actual accuracy. Someone can be absolutely certain they're right, but still be completely wrong because their memory has been reconstructed inaccurately.
That's scary. What else?
Things like the witness's general knowledge and expectations, we tend to remember things consistently with our schemas. Also, difficulties with cross-racial identification are well documented. And crucially, the types of questions asked during interviews. Leading questions, as we saw, can implant misinformation. Even subtle things about the suspect's facial characteristics can influence identification. It's a minefield. #D controversy surrounding repressed memories.
Okay, this whole idea of memory being reconstructed and easily distorted leads us to a really controversial area you mentioned earlier, repressed memories.
Yes, this is a topic that generated huge debate, particularly in the 80s and 90s.
So repressed memories are supposed to be memories usually of childhood trauma or abuse that a person was totally unaware of for years, maybe decades.
And then they suddenly surface, often during therapy, sometimes involving techniques like hypnosis or guided imagery.
The idea being that the mind pushed the memory down, repressed it because the trauma was too overwhelming to cope with at the time.
That's the core concept, rooted largely in Freudian psychoanalytic theory. However, the scientific consensus on whether true, complete repression of severe trauma is a common mechanism is, well, it's heavily debated and questioned by many memory researchers.
Why the skepticism?
Well, several reasons. First, our sources point out that while forgetting details or periods around a trauma can happen, research generally suggests that highly traumatic events tend to produce vivid, intrusive, and often unforgettable memories, even if they're fragmented or emotionally charged. Think PTSD flashbacks. Complete amnesia for severe, repeated trauma seems to be quite rare.
So trauma usually makes memories stronger, not weaker or vanished.
Often, yes, due to the strong emotional encoding and hormonal responses involved. Second, and perhaps more importantly, given everything we've just discussed about memory being reconstructive.
You have the risk of creating false memories in therapy.
Exactly. The very process of searching for hidden or repressed memories, especially using suggestive therapeutic techniques like hypnosis, or repeatedly asking leading questions about potential abuse, runs a significant risk of inducing false memories.
So the therapist might unintentionally guide the patient to construct a memory of abuse that never actually occurred. But because it's constructed, it feels completely real to the patient.
That's the major concern raised by many memory scientists. It doesn't mean all recovered memories are false, of course. Some may be genuine cases of forgotten or previously uninterpreted events being recalled. But the potential for therapeutic suggestion to create convincing false memories is very real, making this an ethically complex area. It highlights just how critical it is for therapists and everyone to understand the constructive and fallible nature of memory.
Okay, so memory can be distorted, reconstructed, even falsely created. But sometimes the issue isn't distortion, it's just blankness. The information seems completely gone. Why does that happen? Why do we forget?
Right. Beyond distortion, there's outright forgetting. And psychologists have proposed several theories. They aren't always mutually exclusive to explain why information that was once seemingly learned just vanishes from our grasp. We can look at four main ones. Hashtag A, decay theory, trace theory.
Right, what's the first one?
The most intuitive, perhaps, is decay theory, sometimes called trace theory.
Decay, like fading away.
Exactly. The idea is that learning something lays down a physical memory trace in the brain, some kind of neural or chemical change, the enneagram we mentioned Lashley searched for. Decay theory suggests that if this trace isn't used or reactivated periodically, it simply degrades and fades away over time.
Like a path in the woods getting overgrown if nobody walks on it. Use it or lose it.
That's the basic idea. It just naturally weakens with the passage of time if it's not reinforced.
Okay, seems plausible. But how can you tell if a memory trace is truly decayed and gone versus just being hard to access?
That's a fair challenge. One way researchers try to measure this is using the savings method, developed by Hermann Ebbinghaus way back.
Savings method.
Yeah, instead of just asking, can you remember this? Ebbinghaus measured how much faster someone could relearn material they had previously learned and seemingly forgotten compared to living it the first time.
Ah, so if it takes you 10 trials to learn a list the first time, and maybe only 5 trials to relearn it a week later, even if you couldn't recall any of it consciously.
That means there's a savings of 50%. Some trace must have still existed, even if it was too weak for conscious recall. It hadn't completely decayed. The relearning was easier because the foundation was still there, however faint.
Clever. Okay, so decay theory suggests time and disuse erode memories. Does this have practical implications for learning?
Oh, absolutely. It directly supports the effectiveness of the massed versus spaced practice effect.
Right, you mentioned this earlier. Space practice is studying over time. Mass practice is cramming.
Exactly. Decay theory helps explain why spaced practice is so much better for long-term retention. When you cram, massed practice, you might activate the trace strongly, but then there's a long period of disuse allowing decay to set in rapidly.
But with spaced practice, you revisit the material at intervals.
Which means you keep reactivating and strengthening that memory trace before it has a chance to decay significantly. Each spaced repetition pushes back against the natural fading process. So, spacing out your study sessions is probably the single best piece of advice based on decay theory. Hashtag B, interference theory.
Okay, so theory 1 is decay memories fade with time and disuse. What's theory 2?
Theory 2 suggests the problem isn't necessarily time itself, but rather other information getting in the way. This is interference theory.
Inference, like static on a radio, other memories blocking the signal.
That's a good way to think about it. Interference theory proposes that forgetting often occurs because other learned information interferes with the retrieval of the target memory. Basically, learning more stuff can sometimes make it harder to remember specific stuff, especially if it's similar.
Okay, I think I've felt that. Are there different kinds of interference?
Yes, there are two main types, depending on the direction of the interference. First, there's proactive interference.
Proactive. Pro meaning forward.
Right. This is when older learning interferes with your ability to recall newer information. The old habits or memories actively push forward and disrupt the new ones.
Can you give an example?
Think about getting a new phone number. You keep accidentally giving out your old number for a while.
Guilty, yes.
Or maybe you drive an automatic car for years, then try to drive a manual stick shift again. You might keep forgetting to use the clutch. The old, well-learned automatic driving habit is proactively interfering with the new or relearned manual driving sequence.
Okay, so old stuff messes with new stuff. What's the other type?
The opposite is retroactive interference. Retro meaning backward.
So new stuff messes with old stuff.
Exactly. This happens when newer learning interferes with your ability to recall older information. The new memory trace somehow disrupts, overwrites, or makes it harder to access the older, similar trace.
Example.
Let's say you learn Spanish in high school, then learn Italian in college. When you later try to speak Spanish again, you might find Italian words keep popping into your head instead. The newer Italian learning is retroactively interfering with your access to the older Spanish vocabulary.
Or remembering an old password after you've been using a new one for months. The new one just comes out automatically.
Perfect example. The more similar the old and new information are, the more likely interference is to occur in either direction. ###Shetch retrieval theory. Inaccessible information.
Okay, so we have decay, fading, and interference, blocking. What's the third theory of forgetting?
The third major perspective is retrieval theory. This one is a bit more optimistic, in a way.
How so?
Retrieval theory suggests that a lot of forgetting isn't because the memory has decayed or been interfered with permanently. Instead, it's simply a failure to access a memory that is actually still stored in the system.
So the information is in there, it's encoded, it's stored, but I just can't find the key to unlock it.
That's the idea. The memory trace exists, but you lack the right retrieval cues at that particular moment to bring it into conscious awareness. It's an accessibility problem, not an availability problem.
This would explain why sometimes a memory I thought was totally gone suddenly pops back into my head later, maybe triggered by a random smell or song.
Exactly. That random stimulus acted as the missing retrieval cue, suddenly providing access to the stored but previously inaccessible memory trace.
Does this theory have a classic example associated with it?
Oh, definitely. The quintessential example of retrieval failure is the tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon, or TOT state.
Ah, yes. That incredibly frustrating feeling.
Right. You are certain you know a word or a name or fact. You might even be able to recall things about it, like what letter it starts with, or how many syllables it has, or something that sounds like it, but the target information itself remains just out of reach.
You can feel it right there, but you can't quite grasp it.
That's the TOT state. And its very existence is strong evidence for retrieval theory. Why? Because if the memory had truly decayed or been overwritten by interference, you wouldn't have that strong feeling of knowing, nor would you be able to access those partial details.
Right. The fact that I know the first letter means something is stored and accessible, just not the whole thing.
Precisely. The information is clearly available in storage. The problem is purely one of temporary retrieval failure. Often, the word will pop into your head later when you stop actively searching for it, perhaps because the right cue finally emerges. #D, motivated forgetting, repression.
Okay, decay, interference, retrieval failure, that covers a lot of ground. Is there a fourth theory?
Yes, the fourth one is a bit different, linking forgetting more directly to our emotions and unconscious processes. This is motivated forgetting, often discussed under the term repression, most famously associated with Sigmund Freud.
Repression. We touched on this with the controversy around recovered memories. So this is the idea that we unconsciously push unwanted thoughts or memories out of awareness.
That's the core Freudian concept, yes. He believed that certain thoughts, desires, or memories that are particularly threatening, anxiety-provoking, or socially unacceptable are actively and unconsciously barred from entering conscious awareness. It's viewed as a psychological defense mechanism.
A way to protect ourselves from mental pain or distress by basically burying the memory.
That's the idea, and an unconscious mental censorship to maintain psychological equilibrium.
Now, you mentioned it's controversial. How does it fit with the other theories? Is it meant to explain everyday forgetting?
That's a crucial distinction our sources make. Repression, in the Freudian sense, is not intended to explain ordinary forgetting, like why you can't remember chapter 3 of your textbook or where you put your keys.
Okay, so decay or retrieval failure are better explanations for that kind of forgetting.
Right. Repression is specifically proposed for highly charged, emotionally threatening material. It's motivated by the content of the memory itself. While the idea of large-scale, unconscious repression of trauma is debated within modern cognitive science, the broader principle that our motivations and emotions can influence what we remember or forget, sometimes called motivated forgetting, more generally, is pretty well accepted. We might selectively forget things that are unpleasant or inconsistent with our self-image, even if it's not a deep Freudian repression.
So maybe less dramatic than full repression, but still a kind of motivated avoidance of certain memories.
Exactly. Our emotional state and goals can definitely shape the accessibility of memories.
We've talked a lot about how memory works and fails. Before we get into the brain biology, maybe we should quickly touch on how memory is actually measured. Does the way we test it affect how much we seem to remember?
Oh, absolutely. The type of memory test used has a huge impact on performance, largely because different tests provide different levels of retrieval support. Hashtag A, measuring retention.
Okay, so what are the main ways to measure memory?
Well, one of the most common and often hardest is free recall.
Free recall. Just remember everything you can.
Pretty much. You're given a topic or shown a list of items, and then later you're asked to recall as much as you can in any order you like. Think of an essay question on an exam, or trying to list all the U.S. presidents.
Right. There are basically no cues provided. You have to generate everything yourself.
Exactly. It requires the most effortful, self-initiated retrieval. Performance on free recall tasks can often seem quite low.
Okay, what's an easier way then?
A much less demanding task is a recognition task.
Recognition, like recognizing someone's face.
Yes. Or, more typically in testing, recognizing the correct answer among several options. The classic example is a multiple choice test.
Ah, the answer's right there on the page. I just have to pick it out.
Precisely. The correct answer itself acts as a very powerful retrieval cue. You don't have to generate it from scratch, you just have to recognize it as familiar or correct compared to the distractors.
So people almost always do better on recognition tests than on free recall tests for the same material.
Almost invariably, yes. Much better. This difference really highlights the importance of retrieval cues. It shows that often information is stored, available, but hard to access without help. Recall failure, yet easily accessible when the right cue is provided, recognition success. It again points back to retrieval failure as a major source of apparent forgetting. Hashtag B amnesia, memory loss.
Okay, so that's measuring normal memory and forgetting.
Yeah.
But what about more extreme cases, like amnesia? That's actual memory loss, right? Not just forgetting.
Yes, amnesia refers to significant memory loss that's typically caused by brain damage, illness, or sometimes psychological trauma. It's distinct from everyday forgetting. And we generally classify amnesia based on when the lost memories were formed relative to the event that caused the amnesia.
Okay, so what are the types?
The first type is retrograde amnesia. Retro meaning backward in time.
So loss of memory for the past.
Exactly. This is the loss of memory for events that occurred before the onset of the amnesia, before the injury or illness. Someone might wake up from a head injury and not remember their own name, their family, or anything about their life leading up to that point.
Wow. Why would a blow to the head wipe out old memories? Weren't they already consolidated?
That's a complex question. Sometimes the loss is temporary, but severe head trauma can disrupt brain function broadly. Also, sources suggest that a concussion or blow can specifically interfere with the final stages of consolidation for memories that were formed in the minutes, hours, or even days just before the injury. These memories might have been in LTM but not yet fully stabilized, making them vulnerable to disruption.
So those recent past memories are the most vulnerable.
Often, yes. Though severe retrograde amnesia can affect memories from much further back.
Okay, so retrograde is loss of past memories. What's the other main type?
That would be anterograde amnesia, antero meaning forward.
So inability to form new memories going forward.
Precisely. This is the loss or severe impairment of the ability to form or store new long-term memories after the event that caused the amnesia. The person can often remember their past perfectly well up until the injury, but they can't effectively learn new facts or remember new experiences.
They're kind of stuck in time, living moment to moment, like the movie Memento or Dory from Finding Nemo.
Those are famous fictional examples, yes. Every experience is perpetually new because it can't be transferred from STM working memory into stable LTM.
What causes anterograde amnesia?
It's classically associated with damage to specific brain regions crucial for memory consolidation, particularly the hippocampus and surrounding structures in the medial temporal lobe. This damage can result from surgery, like the famous patient HM, stroke, oxygen deprivation, certain viruses, or chronic conditions like severe alcoholism leading to Korsakoff syndrome.
And you mentioned alcohol intoxication, like blackouts.
Yes, our sources note that alcoholic blackouts are essentially a temporary drug-induced state of anterograde amnesia. The high levels of alcohol chemically disrupt the function of the hippocampus and other key areas, preventing the brain from properly consolidating memories for events that occur during the period of intoxication. The experiences happen, but they don't get recorded into LTM. Okay, so we've explored memory from a cognitive perspective, the stages, the failures, the distortions. Now let's connect it all back to the physical brain. Where does memory actually live? How does it physically happen?
Right. If memory isn't just an abstract idea, there must be a biological basis. We're looking for the hardware behind the software, hashtag tag tag A, the location of memory. You mentioned Carl Lashley earlier, searching for the enneagram, the single spot where memory is stored. And he failed.
He did. He systematically removed parts of rats' brains after teaching them mazes, trying to find the specific location where the maze memory was stored. But he found that memory seemed to be impaired proportionally to the amount of cortex removed, not which specific part was removed, at least for complex tasks.
So memories aren't filed away in one tiny spot.
That's the conclusion Lashley reluctantly came to, and it's largely held up. The current thinking is that memories, especially complex ones, aren't stored in a single location like a file on a hard drive. Instead, they're stored in distributed patterns of connections across neuronal networks.
Networks of brain cells. So a memory involves many different brain areas working together.
Exactly. Think about your memory of your grandmother. It probably involves visual areas, her face, auditory areas, her voice, olfactory areas, the smell of her cooking, emotional centers, how you feel about her, semantic areas, facts you know about her. The memory isn't in one place. It is the coordinated pattern of activation across all those interconnected brain regions. Hashtag tag tag be the hippocampus.
But wait, you said anterograde amnesia is often caused by damage to the hippocampus. Doesn't that mean the hippocampus is a key location?
Good point. The hippocampus isn't thought to be the final storage site for most long-term memories, especially older ones, but it plays an absolutely critical role in the initial formation and consolidation of certain types of memories.
Which types?
Specifically, declarative memories. These are the memories you can consciously declare or talk about.
Like facts and events?
Precisely. Declarative memory is usually divided into two subtypes: semantic memory, which is your memory for general facts, concepts, and knowledge about the world, like knowing Paris is the capital of France.
And episodic memory, which is your memory for personal experiences, specific events tied to a particular time and place, like remembering your first trip to Paris. So the hippocampus is essential for laying down new semantic and episodic memories. It's like the brain's librarian or indexer for these conscious memories.
That's a great way to put it. It seems to bind together the different elements of an experience, the sights, sounds, context processed in different cortical areas, and helps integrate them into a coherent memory trace that can then be gradually stored more permanently in the relevant parts of the cortex over time through consolidation.
So if your hippocampus is damaged, you lose the ability to create that index for new conscious memories.
That appears to be the core problem in anterograde amnesia involving hippocampal damage. Interestingly, these patients can often still form non-declarative or procedural memories like learning new motor skills, tracing a star in a mirror, or classical conditioning, even though they have no conscious recollection of ever having learned them before.
Wow. So different types of memory really do rely on different brain systems.
It strongly suggests so, yes. The hippocampus is key for conscious recall of facts and events, but other structures like the cerebellum and basal ganglia are more involved in skills and habits. Hashtag tag tag stack tag strengthening neural connections.
Okay, so memories are distributed networks, and the hippocampus helps form new declarative ones. But how does the network actually change to store information? What happens at the level of the neurons themselves?
This gets us to the cellular basis of learning. The fundamental idea is captured in that famous phrase often attributed to Donald Hebb: neurons that fire together, wire together.
Fire together, wire together, meaning?
It means that the act of forming a memory involves strengthening the connections, the synapses, between the neurons that are active during the experience or learning event. When two neurons communicate repeatedly, the connection between them becomes physically and chemically stronger, making it easier for them to communicate in the future.
So learning literally changes the wiring of your brain, making certain pathways more efficient.
Exactly. The pattern of strengthened connections is the memory trace at a cellular level.
Is there a scientific term for this strengthening process?
Yes, the key mechanism believed to underlie much of this synaptic strengthening in areas like the hippocampus is called long-term potentiation, or LTP.
Long-term potentiation. Okay.
LTP is essentially a long-lasting increase in the signal transmission strength between two neurons that results from stimulating them synchronously. Basically, after LTP occurs, the sending neuron has a bigger effect on the receiving neuron for a long time afterwards.
How does that happen physically? Does the synapse change?
It does. LTP involves several changes. For example, the receiving neuron might insert more receptor sites into its membrane at the synapse, making it more sensitive to the neurotransmitter released by the sending neuron. There can also be structural changes, like the growth of new synaptic connections.
And scientists think this LTP process is what's needed for memories to consolidate and become stable in the long term.
It's widely considered a crucial cellular mechanism for learning and memory, particularly in the hippocampus. Blocking LTP pharmacologically often prevents animals from forming new memories for tasks that depend on the hippocampus. It seems to be the way the brain translates temporary electrical activity into durable structural changes. Hashtag tag 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 D genetic bases and future treatment.
Wow, so it goes from experience to network activation to hippocampal processing to LTP strengthening synapses. Does it go even deeper? Like down to the molecular level?
It absolutely does. For LTP to be truly long-term and for memories to consolidate properly, those synaptic changes need to be maintained. And that requires building new components.
New components, like what?
Like new proteins. We've discovered that the transition from short-term memory, which relies more on temporary modifications of existing proteins, to stable long-term memory requires the synthesis of new proteins within the neurons.
And making proteins. That's controlled by our genes, right?
Exactly. The production of these crucial memory-related proteins is regulated by the activity of specific genes. These genes have to be turned on at the right time after learning for consolidation to occur. If you block protein synthesis with drugs during that critical consolidation window, usually hours after learning, you can prevent long-term memory formation even if the initial learning and short-term memory seemed fine.
So memory permanence is ultimately rooted in gene expression and protein synthesis.
It appears so. It's a biological cascade. Experience triggers neural activity, which leads to LTP, which triggers gene expression, which leads to protein synthesis, which stabilizes the synaptic changes, creating a lasting memory trace.
That's incredible. What are the implications of understanding memory at this genetic and molecular level?
Well, the implications are potentially huge, especially for medicine. By identifying the specific gene and proteins involved in healthy memory consolidation, scientists can better understand what goes wrong at the molecular level in diseases characterized by memory loss, like Alzheimer's disease and other dementias.
And if you know what's broken, maybe you can fix it.
That's the hope. The long-term goal is to develop drugs or therapies that can target these specific molecular pathways. Maybe drugs that could enhance the production of necessary proteins, or protect synapses from degenerating, or boost the processes underlying LTP.
So potentially treatments that could slow, halt, or maybe even reverse memory decline in these devastating diseases.
That's the ultimate aim. Understanding the fundamental biology of memory, right down to the genes and molecules, opens up entirely new possibilities for treating memory disorders and perhaps even enhancing memory function in the future. It's a very active and exciting area of research. Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, this has been a truly deep dive. We've gone from just hearing a sound for a few seconds in echoic memory all the way down to the specific genes and proteins needed to make a memory last a lifetime. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. The brain's ability to learn and remember is one of its most amazing and intricate functions.
If we had to boil down some key takeaways from all this, maybe 3 big ones people should remember about their own memory.
Okay, 3 takeaways. First, I'd say, respect the reconstruction. Remember that your memory isn't a perfect recording.
Right. It's built, not played back. So be aware of potential distortions, question your absolute certainty sometimes, and understand how suggestion or later information can subtly change your recollections.
Exactly. Second takeaway, go deep, not shallow. For learning that lasts, you have to move beyond simple repetition, that maintenance rehearsal.
Use chunking to manage information in your working memory effectively. And crucially, use elaborative rehearsal. Connect new information meaningfully to what you already know. Ask questions, make analogies, explain it to others. Build those network connections.
Perfect. And the third takeaway, honor the biology. Remember, consolidation takes time and reinforcement.
So don't cram. Use the spaced practice effect. Study or review material in shorter sessions spread out over time. This allows those LTP processes to work, strengthens the connections, and fights that natural decay. Give your brain the time it needs to wire things together properly.
Well put. Reconstruction, elaboration, and spacing. Those are fundamental.
We ended our discussion right there at the cutting-edge memory being linked to specific proteins and genes. And that really leaves us with a final kind of provocative thought, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, if our identity, our sense of self, is fundamentally built upon our memories, and if we're learning that memory itself is a biological process, chemically and genetically regulated, and potentially manipulable or restorable through understanding things like LTP,
Ah, I see where you're going.
what does that ultimately mean for the nature of the self? If the very foundation of your identity could, in theory, be chemically tweaked, enhanced, or even restored after being lost, does that change what it means to be you? Can identity be separated from the specific biological mechanisms that currently sustain it?
That's a profound question. It really pushes us to think about whether the self is just the content of our memories, or if it's also tied to the process and the specific biological substrate. If we could upload memories or restore them pharmacologically, would that restore the self? It suggests the future of memory research might touch on some very deep philosophical territory beyond just curing diseases.
Something for all of us to think about. In the meantime, we hope you can apply some of the practical principles we discussed, elaboration, spacing, to your own learning right away.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing architecture of human memory.